And I would just encourage you in your work together to spend some time, and you can pick your issue. It can be about looking at case studies that are national, like Obamacare, or it can be something local, like the $15 minimum wage campaign, or whatever. Pick your issue, pick your kind of domain. Spend some time together as students of power, breaking apart that case study, asking who has power, mapping the terrain of power, trying to define the various forms of power: money power, people power, reputational power, power of law, power of norms, all these different forms that it takes. And just understanding and beholding that thing so that all of you can start getting smarter about this stuff. And then as you do that, I want to encourage you to teach it to others outside of this club, to find opportunities, whether informally in your classes or in your rooms with your roommates or whatever, or formally in other ways, to start spreading and democratizing this knowledge. If there's one thing that, there used to be a time when the Democratic Party was just known as the democracy, capital D, right? If there's one thing that should undergird the idea of the democracy, whether capital D or little d, it is the idea of disseminating in democratic fashion this kind of knowledge, so that the knowledge of how you get stuff done, how you unrig a game, how you move an agenda, how you make electeds pay attention to your cause, how you get other people to do as you would have them do, which is the naked definition of power, that this knowledge is not just hoarded by a few, right? The whole point of the democracy, our party, is to disseminate that knowledge wide and far, and trust that when more people have more knowledge of that kind of stuff, we end up being better off as a country, right? But the other thing, too, is to find ways to practice it. And that can be in the context of elections. It can be in the context of just the universe called the University of Washington. Or it can be in the context of getting out there on public issues that have to do with Seattle or King County or Washington State or the nation. But finding ways where you all actively can decide, here's a thing that we would like to change. Here's a set of behaviors or policy choices that we would like to do or undo. Let's set our minds to it collectively as the UW Young Democrats to try to move that ball, to move that thing, to freeze or to unfreeze that particular flow of power. And you take it as a live, practical case study. That's the opportunity that you have when you have a club like this, and you have a gathering like this. It's not just social. It's not just the fellowship. It's not just even the cheering. But it is this opportunity to think about how you're going to teach, disseminate, and how you're going to practice this understanding of power. And I think when you couple the first set of things I was talking about, this kind of, which boil down in a sense to civic character, and having a set of values that make you not an antisocial psychopath, but a pro-social contributor, right? When you tend explicitly to the garden of those values, and you couple that with a conscious, intentional knowledge and command of power, what it is and how it works, then you become orders of magnitude more effective than you were when you first joined this club. And you will leave this campus orders of magnitude more effective as citizens, citizen leaders, citizen activists, than most of your peers and classmates will be in this state, in this country. And in the end, that's what it's all about, right? Every one of you here, by showing up, has announced that you are a leader. I know only a few of you may have formal leadership positions within this organization, and some of you may hold formal leadership positions elsewhere on campus or beyond. But every one of you, by showing up and being one of the kinds of people who does show up on a Monday night, it's cold, there's a lot of other stuff going on, it got dark early today, there's a lot of reasons not to be here, right? But you're here. And that is just one measure of the way in which for the rest of your lives and careers, not just as Democrats, as Americans, as humans, you're going to have this showing up habit that's going to put you into roles and positions where people will turn to you and say, what should we do? Where should we go? How should we do it? Is there a better way? Which way? Right? And in the end, you all, as UW Democrats, as people who go to UW in the first place, are going to be the people that for the rest of your lives, your peers and people my age and people younger than you are going to turn to for guidance. And so take this precious time that you have together, your weekly meetings here, and your short years on this campus to push each other, teach each other, train each other, challenge each other, and force each other to teach and practice the spirit and the nature of power, and to be more deeply grounded in kind of the ethical, philosophical soil of what it means to be a great Democrat in a great America. So why don't I close there with those thoughts and really just leave the balance of our time now for, like I said, questions, ideas, thoughts. I'm happy to talk about any of my time in DC. I didn't mention here in Seattle the ways in which I'm engaged in civic life, and so maybe I'll mention a couple of those just to give you a taste. So number one, this organization, Citizen University, that I run, we do a bunch of programs that are national about teaching the art of great citizenship, but one of them is something that I want to invite all of you to. It's an annual national conference that we hold at Seattle Center Friday, March 21st. And every year we always have a great cohort of UW students, whether from the DREAM Project or from Democrats or other organizations that come and participate. But I would love to see every one of you come. And it's a low fee, but we also have scholarships for students. So that's one arena that I work in. It's programs that are about teaching the art of great citizenship, and that's one. Another, I mentioned guns and background checks, and Initiative 594, some of you may know, which is right now an initiative to the legislature, but we fully expect the legislature will punt it to the people, and it will be on the ballot next fall. This is an outgrowth of an organization that I co-founded just about a year ago, a couple of days after Sandy Hook. My co-author and friend and collaborator Nick and I decided we needed to do something. We needed to do something in our state. And so we gathered a bunch of people together and created what became the Washington Alliance for Gun Responsibility. This is a statewide grassroots coalition that organized. Some of you may well have been involved already as signature gatherers and organizers to help get us signatures for 594. We first pushed to get the legislature to try to pass background checks, and they failed. And I'll be quite candid, we couldn't even get the Democrats in the Senate in the House to agree to this. And so, we recognize that the legislature, which lives in outsized fear of the NRA, was never going to be the vehicle for this kind of change that we had to take to the people. And so we drafted this ballot measure, and we are going full steam ahead. We've crossed 270,000 signatures already, and we'll be really shooting for many more than that when the drop time comes. So that's one other thing. I've been also super involved in public education, serving on the State Board of Education here in Washington, and teach, as I say, here at the UW. So anyway, that's just by way of saying, I think for all of you, connecting the dots between whatever it is that you're passionate about, besides just being a Democrat, whatever issue it might be. It might be education, it might be crime, it might be something else. Finding ways, even if they may seem small right now, gathering signatures, showing up at council meetings, whatever, to begin bootstrapping up and building upon each experience to develop your skill, your voice, and your capacity to be change agents. It's something that I just urge you to do. So any questions or observations or thoughts? We can spend the balance of our time in conversation. Yes?
So I read your backgrounds in democracy book in my political theory class, and we talked about it. And one of the things that we talked about, I remember, was your section on citizenship and how to get involved and get people to become better citizens. And I remember one of the things we talked about was just confronting the just incredible apathy in the general public, and especially with young people. I mean, as student leaders, some of us were in high school, we would go to these big conferences and there'd be all these inspired people and everything would seem so easy. And then you go back to your school and you try to implement these changes and you try to lead by example, and it just got exhausting. You couldn't maintain it and people didn't catch on. So how do you recommend confronting apathy?
Yeah, that's like the billion-dollar question. You all know, I mean, in the millennial generation, that you are all exemplars of, you get a lot of bad press. I'm telling you, right? There's a lot of people bashing millennials for being me, self-centered, not engaged, materialistic, right, apathetic, all these things, right? And I think that's a bunch of crap, actually, number one. But I think it results from a misunderstanding of how a lot of young people are actually starting to engage, right? Now, I'm not sure this helps young Democrats, but I will say this. There's a couple things. Number one, I think there are a lot of young people, you know, your generational peers, who do want to engage in something bigger than themselves, but don't necessarily want to do that in terms of Republican, Democrat, traditional politics. Right? That's one. And I think if you see the boom in certainly kind of social entrepreneurialism and civic, activity among young people that just totally bypasses politics. It's about service, volunteerism. That tells me that there wasn't suddenly a drop in the collective gene pool where this cohort of 18 to 25-year-olds is dramatically less idealistic than previous cohorts of 18 to 25-year-olds. It's just that you all have, a great number of you have decided that these traditional channels and institutions, including politics and what we like to engage in, isn't going to work anymore, right? I don't know how many of you saw flying around Facebook and social media Russell Brand a few weeks ago, and his, as many of you have, those of you who haven't, he gave this interview, I think to the BBC, basically saying voting is a joke, right? That the whole game is rigged, the whole system is rigged for rich people, and that there's no meaningful distinction between parties, and how can I, not only would I not encourage, not only can I not tell a young person in good conscience to vote, I would actively tell them not to vote, because voting is just a weak, watered-down version of passive acceptance of this corrupt, rigged game, right? And he did it much more colorfully than that. He's very entertaining, right? And actually, just as theater, I enjoyed watching him kind of hold forth on this idea. But he was, I think he was half right and half wrong in a way that's super important for you to think about when you're figuring out how to get your peers engaged and stuff. The part he's half right about is that the game is rigged. Politics is increasingly a game controlled by the 1%, for the 1%, and of the 1%. And that's happened under both Republicans and Democrats. And we have to face that truth, right? But the part where he's wrong, and he called in his interview vaguely for a revolution instead. Instead of voting, have a revolution, right? And throw out this entire corrupt system. And my point is that a revolution is perfectly readily available to you right now, right, to young people. It is called getting 100% of young people, getting 100% of poor people, getting 100% of people of color to vote. If you got that to happen, we would have a revolution like you would see. We would have policies and agendas that would flip the 99 and the 1%, in ways that would make Russell Brand's head spin, right? And the means for that are sitting there inert, waiting for us to activate them, right? And one of the things that I said, and I wrote in a piece for CNN after Russell Brand did his thing, was there's a really important way to talk about this stuff with people in general, but I think especially young people, which is not only, a lot of the stuff about trying to shake people out of apathy is kind of exhortation, like, come on, we can do this, like, be a better citizen, like, eat your vegetables, right? And there's a subset of nerds like us for whom that appeal actually works, right? We're like, okay, I will eat my vegetables, right? Thank you for reminding me. But for most people, I think the more effective thing to do is to tell them what is being taken away from them, right? And the point that I made in the context of voting is there is no such thing as not voting. Not voting is voting. Not voting is actively voting to give voice and power and influence to precisely those people who detest you and whom you detest. People who want to bring harm to you and your values and your idea and identities and your interests. Right? So not voting is an active act of handing the keys and the power over to those people. Right? And I think that line of argument about, number one, there are people who want to screw you, and number two, when you don't participate, when you're apathetic, you are just actively making it easier for them to screw you. It is both an edgier and I think in some ways a truer way to appeal to people than simply kind of virtue, right, and eat your vegetables. The second thing I would say, though, about young people, and I suppose people in general, but especially young people, is show people a small way in, right? There are a lot of people who, your age, a lot of people on this campus walking around tonight who, if you stopped and polled them, would agree with almost everything you agree with. They would agree with you on issues. They would even agree with you on values. They would agree with you that it's important to show up and participate. They just wouldn't, in fact, at the end of the day, show up and participate, right? And part of the reason why is it's a little bit intimidating if you're not in this thing to figure out how to get in this thing, right? All of you by now, even if this is your very first meeting at UW Democrats, know more than the average person about how to get involved in something, right? And it can seem intimidating enough to be disempowering, or intimidating enough in a busy time to say, okay, that's off my kind of priority list, if you don't really know how to navigate a system. Again, this is about literacy of power and literacy of how to get involved in stuff. And so, for you all, just trying to think about what are the smallest little ways that you can